Welcome to Hard Script.
She said, "We're not teens anymore. Grow up." She said it casually, standing in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone, not even looking at me, like she was commenting on the weather. I was still wearing my steel-toe boots. 12 hours on the production floor. One incident report away from a shutdown. I hadn't even sat down yet. Her name is Laura. We'd been married 9 years. I'm Mark Bennett, 41, technical director at a manufacturing plant outside Dayton. My job is to keep lines running, people safe, and deadlines intact. If something breaks, I'm the one they call. If something fails, my name is on the report. I rinsed my hands at the sink. Oil, metal dust, the smell of coolant. She kept scrolling. She said something else then. About how she'd been accepted into a regional arts initiative. About a visiting mentor from New York who was opening doors. About how I wouldn't understand because I was too operational. I nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. On the counter was her tablet, unlocked. A calendar invite was open. Evening lecture. Private review. His name was Victor Hale. I recognized it. I'd seen it on programs, grand announcements, panels. Late 50s. Reputation. Access. Laura said it wasn't romantic. She said it was growth. She said intimacy was something you outgrew when you became an adult. I finished washing my hands and dried them slowly. That night, I didn't ask where she was going. I watched her choose a jacket that didn't belong to our shared life. Something curated. Something performative. She checked her reflection twice before leaving. I stayed home. Opened my laptop. Logged into the internal system I'd been avoiding for weeks. There was a transfer request pending. Another facility. Same company. Different city. Higher clearance. More responsibility. I'd been asked if I was interested. I hadn't answered. I answered that night. The confirmation email came back within minutes. Subject line neutral. Tone professional. Effective date 6 weeks out. Laura texted me a photo from the lecture hall later. Stage lights. Applause emoji. Victor in the background, smiling like a man who knew where this was going. I didn't respond. The next morning, I closed our joint travel account. Not out of anger. Out of order. I moved my tools into labeled cases. I separated what was shared from what was mine. When Laura came home late, she talked about how seen she felt. How adult the room was. How refreshing it was to be around people who challenged her. I listened. I didn't interrupt. Before bed, she asked if I was quiet because I was upset. I turned off the light. She had no idea that I'd already started growing up. Quietly. In a direction that didn't include her. 2 days after that lecture, she stopped asking what time I'd be home. That was the first measurable change. Not emotional. Logistical. My morning started earlier. I was already on the floor by 5:30, walking lines, checking interlocks, signing off on safety permits. The plant was preparing for a compliance audit, and my name was on every critical system. I made sure it stayed that way. I requested updated access credentials tied to the new facility. Nothing flashy, just a quiet shift in permissions. Laura adjusted her schedule too. Later mornings. Longer evenings. Her phone stayed face down on the counter now. Notifications silenced. She said it helped her focus. Victor Hale's name began to surface more often, always wrapped in professional language. He challenged her thinking. He refined her voice. He introduced her to people who mattered. She spoke about him the way junior staff talked about executives, careful, reverent, hungry. One night, she mentioned that he'd suggested private reviews outside the institution. Said it was normal at that level. Said it was how real careers were built. I didn't react. I watched the timing instead. Her calendar filled with blocks labeled Simply Review. No location. No end time. I noticed that the days she wore tailored clothes instead of her usual layers, she came home lighter. Brighter. Like she'd stepped into a room where the air was different. On Thursday, I stayed late to finish a failure analysis. A minor fault, but one that could escalate if ignored. I documented everything, uploaded the report, and flagged it for executive review. When I got home, the house was quiet. Her bag was by the door, lighter than usual. Laptop missing. I sat at the table and opened my own device. Not to search her, to close things down. I separated our insurance beneficiaries. Updated my emergency contacts. Removed my credentials from her cloud storage. It took less than 20 minutes. She came home close to midnight. She smelled like someone else's space. Not perfume. Something neutral. Institutional. She talked about how exhausting growth could be, how draining it was to finally be taken seriously. She asked why I'd been so distant. I told her I was busy. That weekend, There was a regional arts fundraiser. Public. Photographed. She asked if I was coming. I said I'd stop by after my shift. I arrived alone. No work clothes. No tie. I stayed near the back, watched her on stage with Victor, close but not touching. Familiar in a way that didn't need permission. When applause started, I left early. No announcement. No scene. By the time she noticed I was gone, I was already home, confirming my relocation packet. The move was becoming real now. Tangible. That night, she didn't come home. I didn't message her. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. She came home the next afternoon like nothing had happened. Same walk through the door. Same keys on the hook. She talked about traffic, about how draining the fundraiser had been, about how late the conversations ran when people with influence finally relaxed. She didn't mention where she'd slept. I was at the dining table with a stack of documents spread neatly in front of me. Not divorce papers. Operational ones. Relocation terms. Housing options near the new facility. Security clearances that required in-person verification. She paused when she saw them. Asked if something was wrong. I told her the company needed me elsewhere. She laughed once, sharp and quick, and said I couldn't just leave. That we had commitments. That adults didn't run from hard conversations. I folded one page and slid it into a folder. The rest followed. Precise. Ordered. That night, she stayed up late on the couch, typing. I went to bed early. When she finally came in, her phone vibrated once on the nightstand before she silenced it. The next morning, I noticed something small. Her ring was off. Not gone. Just placed deliberately beside the sink, like a prop she no longer needed for rehearsal. I didn't comment. At work, I finalized my transfer with HR. New badge. New reporting line. My access level changed immediately. I was briefed on systems I hadn't touched before. Bigger scope. Less noise. I signed the non-disclosure without hesitation. Laura's world accelerated. She started dressing differently even on days she stayed local. Structured jackets. Neutral colors. She practiced her introductions aloud in the kitchen when she thought I was in the shower. One evening, she mentioned Victor had invited her to stay late after a session. Said the work was more focused without observers. She said it the way people explain policy, not behavior. I nodded and packed a bag for the week. I moved into a short-term apartment near the plant. Sparse. Clean. No personal photos. I slept better there. The silence wasn't empty. It was functional. 2 days later, she showed up unannounced. She stood in the doorway like she expected resistance. I let her in without asking questions. She walked around the space, noting what was missing. She said this distance felt dramatic. I told her it was temporary. She said Victor had asked about me. Asked why I hadn't come to recent events. She said it like a test. I didn't take it. Before she left, she touched my arm. Familiar gesture. Out of place now. That night, I attended a safety briefing for senior staff. Public. Documented. Photos posted by the company page. I stood alone in the frame. By morning, she'd seen it. By evening, she sent a message asking when we were going to talk. I archived it and went to sleep. The shift became visible the following week. Not at home. Not in private. In public. The company announced my reassignment internally first, then externally. A short post. Neutral language. New facility. Expanded role. A photo from a site visit I hadn't realized they'd taken. Hard hat. Safety glasses. No one else in frame. Laura saw it before I did. She didn't comment right away. Instead, she posted her own update later that night. A carefully worded caption about mentorship, intellectual rigor, and being invited into rooms that matter. Victor Hale was tagged. The photo showed them seated close at a long table, papers spread between them like evidence of something earned. The contrast wasn't accidental. At work, my calendar tightened. Fewer meetings. More authority. Decisions landed on my desk without commentary. People adjusted quickly when they realized I wasn't temporary. At home, Laura started narrating her progress again. Who had noticed her? Who had praised her framing? How Victor said she was different from the others. More serious. More disciplined. Worth investing in. She said it like a verdict. One evening, she mentioned that Victor had introduced her to a funding director over drinks. She said it was nothing formal. Just conversation. Just alignment. I noted the time stamp on her message. Past midnight. Weeknight. I didn't ask questions. I forwarded my address change to payroll and closed the last shared utility account. It was the only thing still linking our names. A week later, there was another event. A panel discussion. Public. Recorded. She invited me again, said it would look strange if I wasn't there. I arrived on time. Alone. I sat in the back row and watched her speak. Confident. Polished. Quoting Victor without attribution. He watched her like a man reviewing an investment. After the session, people clustered around them. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. I left early again. The next morning, my phone showed missed notifications from her. One voice message. She didn't sound angry. She sounded unsettled. She said Victor had asked about my absence. Asked if everything was stable at home. She said she hadn't known what to tell him. I listened once and deleted it. Later that day, I signed the final relocation document. Permanent housing. Start date confirmed. Travel reimbursed. That evening, she showed up at the apartment again. She looked around, slower this time. Not assessing. Measuring. She asked if I was doing this to punish her. I told her I was doing my job. She said we weren't teenagers anymore. That real adults didn't disappear when things got complicated. I didn't respond. She left quietly. An hour later, my phone lit up with a message she'd clearly rewritten more than once. She asked if we could start over. I didn't open it. I turned the phone face down and kept packing. I didn't answer her message, but I didn't block her either. Silence works better when it's deliberate. The following week unfolded without friction. My days were structured, predictable. Morning briefings, line inspections, closed-door reviews with people who understood consequences. The new facility ran hotter, faster. Fewer conversations, more execution. I fit cleanly into it. Laura's messages changed tone. At first, they were logistical. Questions about mail, about insurance, about whether I'd moved my tools permanently or if this was still temporary. I answered the ones that required a response. Short, factual. Then they became reflective. She said she'd been thinking. Said maybe things had moved too fast. Said Victor had strong opinions, but that didn't mean she'd agreed with all of them. I noted that she still mentioned his name. One night, she sent a photo I hadn't asked for. The two of them at a long table again, papers spread out, glasses half full. Caption neutral. Context unnecessary. I archived the thread. The company scheduled a public walkthrough for stakeholders the following Friday. Executives, local officials, media. My presence was required. The internal notes specified attire, timing, talking points. It was the kind of visibility Laura used to insist didn't matter. She saw the announcement and sent another message. Asked if she could attend. Said it would be good optics. Said it might show unity. I didn't respond. The day of the walkthrough, I arrived early. The floor was quiet. Lines powered down for demonstration. Cameras moved where they were told. People asked questions I'd already answered in documents. Photos were taken. Me alone. Me pointing at systems. Me shaking hands. Laura didn't show. Later that night, she called. I let it ring until it stopped. She left a voice message this time. Said Victor had been distant lately. Said he'd started giving her feedback that felt colder. More conditional. Said she realized maybe she'd mistaken intensity for care. She said she missed how steady things used to feel. I listened once. Then I deleted it. 2 days later, she appeared at the apartment again. No announcement. No makeup. No performance. She said Victor had canceled their last review. Said funding decisions were in flux. Said people were suddenly harder to reach. She asked if this was about her sleeping with him. I didn't answer the question. She said she was willing to reset. To start over. To rebuild like adults. I looked around the apartment. Everything I needed fit where it was. I told her I'd already grown up. She didn't understand what that meant until I handed her the envelope I'd prepared weeks earlier. Addressed. Forwarded. Clean. She stood there holding it, realizing the decision had already been executed. She asked where that left us. I said nothing. I walked her to the door and closed it behind her. That night, I slept without interruptions. The separation became official without ceremony. No lawyers in a room. No raised voices. Just documents exchanged through secure portals and confirmations sent at precise times. I reviewed every page between shifts, signed where required, and returned everything within hours. Efficiency mattered. So did finality. Laura reacted slower than the process. Her messages stopped for a few days, then resumed with a different rhythm. Short notes. Updates she didn't need to give. She said Victor hadn't returned her last call. Said the grant review panel had postponed decisions. Said uncertainty was part of growth. I didn't respond. At work, the pace increased. A near-miss incident on one of the lines required immediate intervention. I stayed late, coordinated teams, documented corrective actions, and sent a report before midnight. The system stabilized. Production resumed on schedule. The next morning, my name appeared in a company-wide notice. Commendation. Quiet recognition. No embellishment. Laura saw it. She showed up again that evening, this time with a folder of her own. She said she'd been advised to secure her position. Said Victor's tone had changed after the funding delays. Less guidance. More distance. She said she was beginning to see patterns. I listened without reacting. She asked if I'd known this would happen. I said nothing. She asked if I'd planned it. I told her I planned my own life. That night, she stayed on the couch, scrolling through messages that no longer came. I went to bed early. The following week, there was another public event. Industry conference. Panel discussion on operational resilience. I was listed as a speaker. Laura wasn't invited. Photos circulated quickly. Me on stage. Neutral background. Direct language. No one else framed as a mentor. Victor Hale attended the conference. I saw him across the room once. Older than his photos. Less confident without context. He didn't approach. Laura texted later that night. Said Victor had been unavailable all day. Said she felt foolish for confusing access with commitment. I archived the message. The move date arrived quietly. I loaded the last of my belongings into the car before sunrise. No hesitation. No nostalgia. Everything left behind had already been processed. Laura didn't come to see me off. She sent one final message as I crossed the city limit. She said she understood now. Said she'd confused growing up with being chosen. Said she was ready to rebuild properly this time. I didn't open it. By the time I reached the new place, my phone had gone silent. The quiet wasn't empty. It was complete. The new city didn't announce itself. No skyline reveal. No dramatic arrival. Just a stretch of highway, a low industrial corridor, and a facility that ran 24 hours a day without asking for attention. I checked into temporary housing, unpacked only what I needed, and reported in before sunrise. People didn't ask about my past. They asked about tolerances, redundancies, and timelines. That suited me. Within the first week, I restructured shift coverage and rewrote 2 protocols that had been inherited without question. The changes reduced downtime immediately. No speeches. No resistance. Results have their own language. Laura stayed quiet longer than I expected. Then her messages started again, spaced further apart, less confident. She talked about reassessing her direction. About how the arts board had paused several projects. About Victor stepping back to avoid complications. She didn't say his name as often now. When she did, it sounded smaller. One afternoon, she sent a link to an article featuring Victor. A profile piece, less glowing than the others. Mentions of controversial mentorship practices. No accusations. Just questions. I didn't click it. My workdays lengthened, but my evenings cleared. No notifications. No negotiations. I ate simply, slept deeply, and reviewed plans for permanent housing near the facility. The company covered relocation without friction. My role had stabilized faster than expected. At the end of the month, there was a regional operations summit. Public again. Executives, vendors, oversight committees. I was asked to present a case study on risk mitigation. The material was clean, factual, unemotional. Photos circulated afterward. Same pattern. Me alone. Me in conversation. Me leaving early. Laura saw them. She sent a message that night saying she hadn't realized how much she'd relied on borrowed authority. She said she was starting over too. Enrolling in smaller projects. Rebuilding credibility from scratch. She asked if we could meet when I was back in town. I archived the message. 2 weeks later, she showed up anyway. Not at my door. At the facility's public entrance during visiting hours. She stood back, watched me through glass walls as I walked the floor. I didn't acknowledge her until she stepped forward. She said she just wanted to talk. I told her I had a meeting. She said she understood now what growing up actually looked like. That it wasn't attention or proximity to power. That it was responsibility without applause. I didn't argue. Security logged her out after 10 minutes. That evening, she sent one last message. No emotion. No appeal. Just a sentence acknowledging that I'd left before she realized the game had rules. I didn't respond. I updated my address, locked my phone, and reviewed the next quarter's schedule. Everything was in place. Distance has a way of clarifying what proximity hides. Weeks passed without interruption. My routines solidified. Early starts. Late finishes. Clean handoffs. The facility ran smoother than projected, and the metrics reflected it. Fewer incidents. Shorter downtimes. Predictable output. Predictability is underrated. Laura's presence faded from my days, then from my thoughts, until her name appeared in a different context. An internal memo circulated about a restructuring of regional arts funding. Several projects were dissolved. Others were absorbed under new leadership. Victor Hale's name was listed once, near the bottom, attached to an advisory role with limited scope. No mention of mentorship. No mention of authority. I closed the document and returned to my work. That weekend, I attended a small industry dinner. No press. No panels. Just operators and decision-makers who preferred quiet conversations. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. When someone asked what I did before this role, I summarized it in one sentence and moved on. Later that night, Laura sent another message. She said she'd stepped down from her curator role. Said the board wanted fresh perspectives. Said she was freelancing now, pitching smaller proposals, trying to rebuild without attachments. She said it felt honest, even if it felt smaller. She asked if I was proud of her. I didn't answer. A few days later, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a book she'd once said changed her life. Margins full of notes. Passages underlined. A marker at the last page. I placed it on the shelf and didn't open it. The company announced my permanent housing approval that same week. Close to the facility. Quiet street. No shared walls. I signed the lease digitally and scheduled the move. Laura didn't reach out again after that. I heard about her indirectly instead, through mutual acquaintances who mentioned she was finding herself, that she'd learned hard lessons about influence and dependency, that she spoke about me with a mix of regret and distance. I didn't correct anyone. On a cold morning near the end of the quarter, I stood on the facility roof during a routine inspection. The sun came up slow and clean. No audience. No applause. I checked my phone once. No new messages. I turned it off. Some people mistake growing up for becoming visible to the right eyes. They mistake guidance for control and proximity for power. I didn't grow louder. I didn't demand understanding. I adjusted my position, secured my footing, and stepped forward without looking back. The system held. So did I. The invitation arrived without urgency. A neutral email from a regional oversight council, asking if I would sit in on a review panel the following month. No keynote. No spotlight. Just evaluation and risk assessment for infrastructure funding. I accepted within minutes. The work was familiar. Quiet authority. Clear parameters. Laura heard about it through someone else. Her message came late, shorter than before. She said she'd seen my name on the panel list. Said it felt strange watching me move further into rooms she used to chase. She didn't ask to come. She didn't ask for anything. I didn't respond. The panel met in a converted municipal building. Long table. Paper folders. No branding. People spoke carefully, knowing decisions would outlast impressions. I contributed when necessary, asked questions that slowed the room, the kind that forced clarity. Afterward, one of the council members thanked me for my restraint. Said most people confused authority with presence. I drove home before sunset. That night, Laura sent one final message. She said Victor had formally stepped away from advisory roles. Said the investigations hadn't named him directly, but proximity had consequences. Said she finally understood the cost of borrowing status instead of building it. She said she'd told people I'd left because I outgrew the situation, not because I was angry. I read it once. I didn't answer. The next week, my lease finalized. I unpacked fully for the first time since leaving. Tools on one wall. Books on another. Everything visible. Everything intentional. At work, my responsibilities expanded again. No announcement. Just an added layer of trust. I noticed it in the way people waited for my sign-off before moving forward. Laura faded into background noise. Occasionally, someone mentioned her name in passing. She was teaching now. Small workshops. Temporary appointments. Honest work. Unstable. Real. I didn't ask questions. One evening, while reviewing next quarter's projections, I found an old photo saved deep in my archive. Us at a street fair years ago. Before mentors. Before influence. Before performance. I deleted it without hesitation. The past didn't need witnesses. Later that night, I received a calendar alert for the oversight panel's final session. Same building. Same time. Different outcomes. I turned off the light and went to sleep. By morning, there was nothing left unresolved. The distance wasn't punishment. It was alignment. I had grown up exactly as she asked, just not with her watching. The final message came months later. No urgency. No timing strategy. Just a simple notification on a quiet Sunday morning while I was reviewing maintenance logs at my kitchen table. Her name appeared without punctuation, without framing. She said she'd been thinking about that night in the kitchen. About the way she'd said grow up, like it was an instruction, not a dismissal. She said she finally understood what she'd asked for. She said she wasn't asking to go back, just asking if we could start over. As different people, on equal ground. I read it once. Outside, the facility siren marked a shift change. Predictable, measured, the kind of sound that meant systems were doing what they were built to do. I didn't reply. Later that day, I attended the final oversight session. Same building, same table, different outcomes. Funding approved. Safeguards added. Decisions recorded without commentary. When it ended, there were no handshakes. Just nods. Respect without performance. I drove home before dark. The apartment felt permanent now. Not because of furniture or location, but because nothing inside it needed explanation. Every object had a function. Every silence had a purpose. I powered down my phone for the night. The next morning, I woke before the alarm and went for a run along the perimeter road. Cold air. Empty lanes. No audience. Halfway through, I realized I hadn't thought about her once. At work, a junior engineer asked how I'd handled the transition to a higher role so smoothly. I told him preparation makes most things look calm. He nodded like he understood. By afternoon, the system audit came back clean. No anomalies. No flags. The kind of report that never makes headlines. That evening, I turned my phone back on. No new messages. She didn't follow up. She didn't ask again. I imagined she'd said what she needed to say to feel finished. That was her process. It didn't need my participation. I deleted the thread and archived the contact. Growing up, I'd learned, wasn't about visibility or validation. It wasn't about being seen as adult by the right people at the right table. It was about knowing when to leave a room without being asked. She wanted a restart. I had already moved forward. Quietly. And this time, there was nothing left behind that could call me back.